Yeah, my roommate last night, we were all hanging out, and then one of my roommates, she's like, "Hey, I don't want to share a joint with you, but I could give you some and you could roll one yourself." So we both went out in the backyard, and as I was smoking it, I went, "Oh, right, I'm supposed to watch Pirates of the Caribbean, and I'm going to be doing it completely stoned." And I gotta say, it's actually a great movie to watch, completely stoned. It's a lot of fun, which is maybe why I struggled, because I was watching it and I was going, wow, oh, this is cool. Oh, wow. Oh, this is cool. Oh, that's a big octopus.
Oh, man. I think it's a squid, actually, but...
Oh, I know.
You know what? Maybe we should get into it.
Welcome. You are entering into a strange dimension. A dimension where narratives from across space and time come together. Narratives that could have, might have, or should have been all exist here in one space. This is CineCasters Ultimate Timeline.
Welcome back to CineCasters. This is the show where we watch terrible or sometimes quirky or maybe ungraceful movies would be the best way to put it, and try and pitch better versions or different versions back to each other. I'm Janglez Lestrange, and I'm joined by my excellent cohort and partner in crime, Nate Draper.
Hello, that is me. How's it going?
Well, I'm doing well. I hope everyone's staying safe at home. And this week we decided to switch it up a little bit with a movie that isn't what I would call terrible by any means, actually.
No.
And because we did a couple movies in a row that I would consider to be, below average movies in terms of quality, and this movie does not fall into that category. And we're doing Pirates of the Caribbean: Dead Man's Chest. That's the second movie out of the original trilogy. And, well, let's jump right into it. Tell me your thoughts about this movie, things you liked and things you didn't like.
Well, as you said, it's actually a fun movie. I enjoyed watching most of it this time around, and I remember watching it when it first came out in the theaters and actually enjoying the experience of it. The things I thought worked, I thought the action sequences in terms of the visual comedy and the choreography, I thought was very creative, and there were just some great sequences, like the scene where they're swinging on the little jails made out of bones.
Yeah.
And then also they're trying to climb, and then there's the moment where they realize, they go, oh, only 6 people are really needed to steer the ship, and then they start racing each other, and then there's another guy, there's a guard that passes, so there's moments like that are done, I think, are just done very well. I also I'm just a big fan of Bill Nighy, who plays Davy Jones, and I thought that character, and I even thought in terms of the visual effects, I actually think they hold up. I actually think I think they still look good, and especially where I noticed is the lighting. The lighting really matched, and it really felt like the characters were interacting with someone who was really there. So yeah, I had a hard time pinning down what it was that I thought was working and what wasn't working. Where I think it doesn't work, or what I think it's lacking, let's say, is, well, first of all, I'm not going to lie, I do find Johnny Depp sometimes to be just a little too much as Captain Jack Sparrow. As much as I do love the character, I do find, in this movie in particular, there's some moments where I just go, that's just a little too much. Maybe that's just me. But what I feel like the movie was really missing was, there's just like an arc. There's just like an emotional character development arc that's missing. And I think part of the reason, my guess is, the reason it's not there is because there's just too many characters for a 2 hour, 2.5 hour movie.
Yeah, it's a long movie.
It is, but even for a long movie, there's not enough time. It's not able to spend enough time with one character to see them transform or really wrestle with issues. So I just think, and overall, my impression is it's actually not a bad movie. It's kind of like a long, I don't know, if you think of like a Saturday morning cartoon where it's like, it's fun to watch.
Yeah.
But it doesn't go beyond that. And there's nothing, I don't think there's necessarily anything that's wrong with that. But I just know for myself, I do like something that has a little bit more substance to it, let's say.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's sort of those are my 2 cents.
Yeah, I all those points were super accurate, and most of them, I actually only have like 2 things that I really don't, that I really didn't like, and you touched on like the character arc thing, specifically Elizabeth, how like Elizabeth goes from like being disappointed about her wedding to like wanting to bone down with Jack Sparrow. I fucking hated that. Like it just. There's a How It Should Have Ended, the animated series on YouTube called How It Should Have Ended. They do a whole thing about that, where like Will Turner is like shows up and Elizabeth is like, "Oh, you noticed me kissing him," and he's like, "What the fuck?" And he's like, "How could you do this? It's almost like somebody rewrote your entire character without even thinking about you." Like in screen, he's like calling her out without even thinking about anything or all the motivations, regardless of anything you've done before. They rewrote your character. Like and I was kind of like, yeah, a little bit, like a little bit. I liked that they were like, oh, let's make Elizabeth more than just a damsel in distress, because. Not that she was capable in the first movie, but you know, now she gets to do a bit of sword fighting, and I thought that was pretty cool, and they sort of explain all that, and it was great. The music is, of course, excellent. I love the music. I actually really like Cutler Beckett as a villain.
Oh, yes.
Like I mean, Davy Jones is sort of our villain, but like Cutler Beckett is sort of this overarching villain. I almost wish that the movie had been done as a trilogy, with this one being the first one, like, you know, sort of splitting this movie and the movie that comes after at World's End into 3 movies, so that we could get like sort of, you know, Davy Jones as the villain for the first one, and then maybe you know, another villain, or like Sao Fang from the 3rd movie as the villain for the 2nd movie, and then, you know, at the end we have Cutler Beckett, who's been in all 3 movies, but has like, what I really like about him is that he's not menacing as a villain. He's not he doesn't need to be a villain that is like Davy Jones. When he shows up, you're like, holy shit, like he looks intimidating, and the way he acts is cruel, and I think that works really, really well for him. Whereas Cutler Beckett is like cunning. He's sly. Even in his mannerisms, he's just like at the very beginning he shows up and he's like, yes, I have an arrest warrant for William Turner, and then, you know, Governor Weatherby pulls it out, and he's like, this says Elizabeth Swann, and he's like, oh, does it? That's a shame. This one's for William. And you're just like, oh, that's so sleazy and gross and political, and it makes for a villain, like, especially when you have 2 villains in a movie like this, where you have Cutler Beckett, who's this sleazy politician, and you have Davy Jones, who's sort of the driving force, more classical antagonist. It's like, this works because they're 2 very different things. They're motivated by different things. Davy Jones is motivated by love or lack thereof, so it makes him almost like primal. Like, in a lot of ways, Davy Jones represents like man versus nature. The fact that he's like of the sea, he is the sea. You know, oftentimes people say, you know, like, oh, he's been lost at sea, and Davy Jones sends like, I am the sea. You know what I mean? Like, so he represents sort of man versus nature, what with the Kraken as well, that responds to him. Whereas, and Cutler Beckett sort of is like the greed and power hungry sort of version of man. And so we get 2 different villains. I mean, if you wanted to get really thoughtful, you could pitch something that way. I didn't, but I think Cutler Beckett is amazing. The visuals, everything about the way this movie is shot is amazing. The visual effects, you were right, they still hold up. Like, I think they must have won some awards for this, because
I think it did, actually.
Yeah. I honestly, when I first heard it, I couldn't believe that this movie was not like the fish people weren't practical effects. I thought they must have been practical effects and then touched up. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Like, just, you know what I mean? Like some kind of prosthetics to make them look that way, and then they just touched them up afterwards. But no, they were wearing mocap suits, like, or maybe not mocap, but like they were wearing like suits the whole time.
The dots and all that, the tracking markers, and
like, or green screen suits, and everything was like I mean, their faces were painted black or whatever, so that they could just like paint over them, and it looks so good. Like I feel like there are times where I'm looking at Bootstrap Bill, and I'm like, I just want to like pick the barnacles off you. Like, it's so gross. I just want to like pull them off of you. Ugh.
Yeah. No, I know what you mean. It looked, there was a lot of texture, which is very impressive.
And it's visceral. Like, you look at it and you're like, oh, it's gross. Get it on my face. Yeah. And like, there's almost, I kept thinking about it because in the third movie, there's a scene where he pulls the starfish off his face. Like Bootstrap Bill does. And I was like, that's the most satisfying thing I've ever seen, because it's just, it bothers me so much during the whole movie. And then he finally like pulls it off and you're like, oh God. It's like when people pull the plastic off of their phone covers.
Oh yeah.
It's like that satisfying. It's just like, oh, finally you don't have this bumpy thing all over your cheek. Anyway, getting off topic.
Pop this giant zit.
Oh yeah, like the barnacles do look like giant zits. There's also one really excellent line. As much as I hated the Elizabeth and Jack thing, there's a really excellent line where Jack realizes that it's Elizabeth that's talking to him. He's like, I'm looking for my son, Will Turner. And he's like, oh, it's Elizabeth. I'm sorry, Elizabeth. I have to tell you, for you, it's either a dress or nothing. And I just so happen to have nothing in my cabin. I was like, that is actually pretty funny. Like, I mean, obviously it's sexist and whatnot, but like, I couldn't help but laugh. I was like, that's terribly funny. Yeah. And that's about it.
There were some moments in the movie where I was genuinely, I thought they were genuinely hysterical.
Yeah, I think the action
I can't remember what
scenes
they were off the top of my head.
Are great. You had mentioned the cage one, but I think specifically my favorite is the one where we have this, extended fight scene of them on the wheel, the water wheel.
Yes, that's another one too.
That's just so fun. And it gets me excited.
It's really creative.
It's so creative. Like, it's so good. It's and I mean, the story isn't terrible. My big thing,
I agree.
Yeah, my big thing with the story, I think you're right about the character arc. And actually, in my pitch, I think I fixed both the character arc problem that you had mentioned and the Jack Sparrow or / Johnny Depp being annoying problem. I think I've managed to at least assuage them as a majority. So yeah,
nice.
I was worried when you had said, let's do Dead Man's Chest. I was like, oh, because like I really like the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. They're a lot of fun. They're not the smartest movies out there, but they're fun. Like, I think I saw this one in theaters, and I saw the next. I've seen all of them. I really like them, and they only get sort of worse and worse, which is disappointing. But they're so fun. They're just a fun time. I really enjoy watching them every time I come back to them. And I was like, how am I going to write a pitch for this movie if I really, really already like it? But of course, you can always make something better or different. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, I don't have
Cool
anything
stuff.
else to say except for the music is so good. Bill Nighy is awesome. I do think there's a lot of actors. The two comedians, I can't remember what their names are. The comedic characters.
The one guy who's missing an eye.
Yeah.
I
can't remember the names. Those guys are super funny. And I do think that they come in just at the right time, so we're like introduced to them as new characters. But I do think that there's a lot going on. Like in the last scene, you can see like all of them are lined up, where it's like it's Will, Gibbs, those two comedic characters, Elizabeth, like they're like all in a row, and you're just like, wow, there's a lot of characters. And Jack's not even in that scene, and then they reintroduce Barbossa, which to me is why this movie is the least good movie.
Oh, okay, right.
Because Barbossa is my favorite character.
Yeah, he's an interesting character.
Barbossa,
I mean, it's Jeffrey Rush.
But Barbossa is my favorite character. So this movie's not a bad movie, but it suffers the most because Barbossa is such a great villain / not villain to Jack. He's like,
yeah, exactly.
Whereas Jack is like pretends to be stupid, but is actually kind of cunning, or things at least just fall into his place. It's like Jeffrey Rush as Barbossa is like Hector Barbossa is like very, thoughtful, painstakingly plotting, and almost just as quirky. Like he's got this weird thing for hats that Jack also has. Like he's this sort of great foil to Jack.
Yeah, I agree, because one of the things that I found frustrating with the Captain Jack Sparrow character in this movie in particular, and I can't remember. It's been a while since I've seen the first one, I'll admit, but in this one in particular, I did find him to be. It's this weird balance of like things happen to him too easily, and also I remember in the first film he knows more than what he's actually letting on about.
Yeah.
So he's actually very conniving, and that was, I think, kind of missing from this movie, where he's just kind of this moron who happens to things just happen to go his way. But I feel like where he's a more interesting character is when he acts that way. He puts on this act of like, oh, it was an accident, but really he actually knows. He knows a lot more. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I think I've done that in my pitch as well, like where he's planned it out. And one of the big things for me is in the first, Jack as a character across all 4 movies. There's 5 now, I guess, isn't there? Yeah,
I think there's 5. Yeah,
across all 5 movies, Jack doesn't actually have a character arc.
Right.
In any of them. Particularly, this works in the first one because he's not the main character.
Right.
Right? And he shouldn't be the main character. So in the first one, I'm just going to go on a rant for a second. In the first one, he's not the main character. Will is, and by extension, Elizabeth. But Jack is sort of along for the ride, and he's sort of cunning and conniving. And this happens a lot in movies where we get a character who becomes a fan favorite, and then slowly they move more prominently into a position that makes them in the spotlight. So now we get Jack as a much more prominent character, has his own like sort of emotional arc going through the entire second movie, where now he had stakes in the first one, but it's like now he's much more of a main character. And in the third one, the same thing happens. By the time we get to the fourth one, there's a main character that isn't Jack, but he's so tangential. Jack is the main character in the fourth one.
Huh.
And they do the same thing in the fifth one. And it's like, this works best when Jack isn't the main character.
Right.
When Jack is plotting, like a conniving side character who can still be prominent, but he has to be more than that. And I think I fixed that as well in my pitch, where Jack can't be the main character. So if you're going to leave Will and Elizabeth like they did when they started the fourth one, then you need to have a new main character. And they try to introduce a new main character, and it sort of doesn't work because they spend too much time focusing on Jack. You can't, if Jack's going to be your main character, he's got to have an emotional through line. He's got to have an arc, and he doesn't at all. Jack doesn't really grow as a character ever.
No, I agree. I think that's another shortcoming with the series, and specifically, I would put the second and third movie kind of go together.
Yeah.
But I think that's really missing, especially because it's hard to tell whose story this is really.
I think, and I do it in my pitch, that this story is Will and Elizabeth's story.
Or it definitely should have been.
Should have been. That's what it should have been.
And I tried to do that too, yeah.
Now, I will say, just because he's my favorite character, and because who knows when we'll do 3, 4, or 5, that Barbossa, I actually do think, has a great arc throughout the series. Like, in the first movie, he's a villain. He has clear wants and needs. So does Jack in the first one. But in the third one, we see Barbossa sort of have wants and needs. In the fourth one, he's probably the most interesting character in the fourth one.
Oh, interesting.
He's like back to being like a half villain in the fourth one. And then the fifth one, as bad as anyone might think the fifth one is, at least Barbossa has like a through line. We see his character develop over time. I actually really like at least Barbossa's character development all the way from 1 to 5.
Oh, so, interesting.
Yeah.
That's interesting, yeah. I haven't seen 4 or 5.
Okay, 4 is... It's worth watching just for Barbossa, but I think we'll get around to them because they're very much like this movie, where it's like this is a lot of fun, a good time to watch, and there is at least some good writing, good plot, good intrigue where characters are constantly undercutting each other, which I do think makes for a really good pirate movie, like whose side is who on and who's doing what for whom. It works really, really well. But they're not always the smartest. We're not talking about the highest grade of the grade movies. But if somebody were to be like, oh, hey, do you want to go out and see a movie and then have like dinner afterwards, or on a date or something like that, this would be a movie that I would easily pick. It's highly entertaining. Yeah, all of them are like that.
Right.
Yeah. Unless you wanted to, have a philosophical discussion over dinner about, I don't know, the nuances of existentialism, then I wouldn't watch this one.
This is not yeah. That'd be an interesting date.
That would be, depending on how it goes, the best or worst date ever.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's like that's the kind of thing I would love that.
Well,
personally.
again, it depends on how it goes, because it depends on your date's view of existentialism.
Oh, yeah. I guess
but
that's it.
That could also be great. You could have very opposing views on existentialism and still have a great time, I think.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of like, if you're able to actually have that discussion. So for me, if I'm able to have that kind of discussion with someone, even if we don't agree, that's a key. Like, oh, okay, this is someone who's thinking.
Yeah, and what's interesting about that too is you could have similar values to someone about something and have very different views on existentialism.
Oh, definitely.
And still have similar
Agree.
values. Like, yeah,
I think so too. Yeah.
Anyway, enough about existentialism on dates, which is a whole conversation on itself. I want to hear your pitch.
Yeah. All right, I have it right here. Okay, so mine starts maybe 45 minutes in from when the current movie actually starts.
Okay.
And it starts with we're on a boat, and we're following someone it's a young boy. It's actually Elizabeth, but we don't reveal it just yet. Like, it's shot in a way where you don't exactly know who it is. But eventually you're like, oh, it's Elizabeth, and you quickly piece together that, oh, she's a stowaway on a boat. But you as the audience are going, what's going on? Why is she on a boat? Why has she cut her hair? What's she doing? And it follows her around for a little bit, just being on this boat, trying to fit in. And she actually befriends another boy who's on the boat, who's just gone out to sea for the first time. And she basically tells him what's going on, because she trusts him, and she explains like, oh, I was going to get married, and then this we were told that we were going to be executed unless we could go find Jack Sparrow. And I was imprisoned, and my soon-to-be husband was off finding him, and I escaped. And now I'm trying to go help him. Will, meanwhile, washes up on shore, and he's on the island where the Captain Jack Sparrow character is pretending to be this leader of this tribe. Yeah. And in my version, he doesn't actually know how to communicate with them. They've just made him he thinks that they've made him their leader, not realizing they're actually planning to cook him and eat him and all of his friends. And who Will is then trapped with. Anyway, they all escape, and this is pretty much right up at the beginning of the movie. And Will explains that he's been trying to find Jack. He doesn't explain that he needs Jack to go back so that he can basically exchange Captain Jack Sparrow for Elizabeth. He just says, like, Elizabeth is in trouble and we need to go help her. And then Jack says, okay, well, I'll help you, but you've got to help me first, and I need you to help me find this key. Anyway, at this point, oh, wait, hang on a second. I just lost my spot.
No, that's okay.
So as they're escaping the island, the Flying Dutchman shows up. And this is where Jack trades Will in and says, like, okay, basically says, can you take him as a placeholder in my space for now? And so Will then is on the Flying Dutchman, and Jack is then off to go sail the seas. But he's looking for this key. Later, Elizabeth catches up to Captain Jack Sparrow, and then Jack says, like, oh, Will was captured by the Flying Dutchman, and he convinces her, like, we need to go find this key in order to help rescue Will. So they get to where they're actually looking for the chest. They're not looking for the key. Jack knows that Davy Jones has the key. And when they get to the spot where they need to get the chest, there actually has to be in order to get it, you have to prove that you're willing to sacrifice something. And so he's actually bringing Elizabeth along because he's in the back of his mind like, okay, well, we can sacrifice her and I can get this chest and I'll be able to set myself free, like be able to get rid of this thing that's chasing me. However, on the way to this, once they get to this island, Elizabeth figures out what's actually going on, and she escapes. And in the process of the escape, they have a little bit of an exchange, and he says like, come on, you're going to sacrifice yourself in order to save Will. This is the only way to save Will, and you can save him from an eternal damnation on this ship. And then she says, okay, but yeah, would you sacrifice yourself for somebody? But she manages to escape. And meanwhile, Will has actually got the key from Davy Jones and managed to escape from Davy Jones. But then there's another scene where Davy Jones is on the ship watching Will escape and says, no, this is he's going to lead us to Jack and actually the island, because he wants to get the chest back that has his heart, but he's not able to go on land, and he can't send any of his men to go on land. So his plan is he's going to get Jack to go on land, get the heart, and then he's going to ambush Jack and get it back.
Yeah.
Anyway, Elizabeth has escaped, and Will shows up, and they meet, and she explains like Jack was gonna kill me in order to get this chest. And Will says, okay, well, maybe we can just escape. Like we're not able to get Jack, so let's just escape and we'll just go live, away from our old life. Anyway, at that point, Davy Jones shows up and basically takes Will back and then tells Elizabeth like, okay, you have to go back. Like the only way you can save Will is if you actually go back and help Jack get the chest. Otherwise, like I'm keeping Will. So she goes back to the island, shows up where Jack and the rest of his crew are, and pretends that she's had a change of mind and like, no, actually I will, like, you can get the chest. I don't want to have Will condemned to this ship. But in the meantime, Jack has actually had a change of heart, and and he decides, no, actually, I think you're right. It's not right for me to ask to betray someone who I've trusted. So he says, you can kill me and take the chest, and you can get Will back. However, as they're about to kill Jack, the thing opens, and then they have one of these revelatory moments where they go, "Oh, we were told you had to prove you were willing to sacrifice something that was of value to you, not actually and because what you valued was your own life above others, because you showed you were willing to do that. Now it's opened."
Yeah.
So they get the chest, and they're walking back. Jack does not know that Davy Jones is actually waiting in the harbor. And so as they're walking back, Elizabeth knows that she is actually going to effectively betray Jack. So, in order to get Will back. And they get back to the Pearl, and then Davy Jones shows up with all of his cronies and basically says, okay, give us the chest and give us Jack, and here's Will. And then they have an exchange with Jack, and Jack says, I knew you were going to do this. I knew that you actually were going to betray me into the Davy Jones' hands, who were out in shore. Yeah. But you can stay. I know that you needed me in order to actually... He basically says, I know what's going on. I know that you went to find me so that you could then be freed. I'm sorry that you weren't able to do that, but you can stay on the Pearl and you can flee with the Pearl, and I will go with Davy Jones, and I will accept that this is my own, what I am condemned to, because I've betrayed enough people and I probably deserve it. So at that moment, so Davy Jones disappears, and then the trading company arrives. They had actually been following Elizabeth this whole time, or Will, but they figured out this is where they are. And there's a conflict, and Elizabeth is able to escape with the people on the Pearl, but Will gets captured. And it sets up for the next film with them basically going back to, I think, to wherever it is at the end of the movie, but them basically going, we're going to hatch this plan to go and rescue Jack, who is now being taken to Davy Jones. So basically, in my version, it's actually not too different, but the key thing that I wanted to play around with was this whole notion that Jack is, in the version that we have, they question his motives, but he never really questions himself. I felt like what I was trying to do is get it to a point where he goes, oh, I am selfish. I did not care about other people. I used other people. And now I am going to do the right thing. And after he does the right thing, then he gets punished after that. And then the other characters who are going from the beginning, they were going, oh, he betrayed us, like he's used us. They end up betraying him and then setting up for the next movie that they are going to correct their mistake. And that,
that's good.
And that Jack actually goes on to Davy Jones's ship willingly by the end of the movie. But I also had this idea that you plant a seed that he helped set it up so that they would later then come back to rescue
him. Because he knows it's all happening. I also really like the idea of like Jack finally taking responsibility, so he gives his own life up on the ship for Davy Jones. The same way that like in order to get to the chest, you had to like value your life over, like sacrifice your life over somebody else's through value. I like that.
Thank you. Yeah, I realize it's a little messy, but the core idea is,
and it stays pretty much the same. True. The thing, because I did the exact same thing. I focused more on like story arcs rather than theming. We tend to do a lot of like theming with ours, so I did the same thing. Like mine doesn't change too much of what actually is going on storyline wise, but I wanted to make sure there was more arcs, and I didn't do much in terms of theming or philosophy because I felt like this movie doesn't really need it.
Yeah, exactly.
So that was really good. Do you mind if I get into mine?
Thank you. Sorry?
Do you mind if I get into mine?
Oh yeah, go for it.
Cool. Where am I? Okay. So my film actually centers around Will and Elizabeth the same way, but instead it starts with their like planning their wedding, like so it's leading up to their wedding day, and like everything's all good, and then finally like the wedding's about to happen, and it's interrupted. So we actually see the two of them like before Cutler Beckett shows up, we see Elizabeth and Will like interacting and getting ready for their wedding, and then finally they're about to get married. Then the Navy shows up with Cutler Beckett, or the East India Trading Company shows up with Cutler Beckett, and that whole scene plays out the same. So they are being accused of piracy, of helping Jack escape, just like what happened in the first movie. And so Will is like, or Cutler Beckett basically says, look, I'll make a deal with you. If you can bring me back Jack's compass, I just want the compass. I don't even need Jack. I will sign a pardon for you and Elizabeth. And so Will says, okay, that's fine. So he leaves. And so we see him go on an adventure. They sort of do this in montage, but I want to do a bit more with it. Like show Will going through all these places. Then Elizabeth also, after a week or so, is like, I'm going to go after Will. So she leaves as well and strikes up a deal with Cutler Beckett the way she does in the original movie. So like, so now like Will is searching for Jack to get the compass, and Elizabeth is trying to find Will, saying that like we can forget about Jack. Like I have another way that we can get out. Like I already have the pardons. So finally, Will winds up, finding a place where he thinks that Jack might be, and he sets foot on this island, and then he gets shot with the poison dart. That's fine, and he wakes up. But when he wakes up, he's inside the cage already. So he's inside the cage, and he's like, "Well, what's going on? Oh, Gibbs, it's you, and it's Mr. Cotton, and all these people that he knew from the first movie." And then they explain how they wound up on the island. And so we get like all of this through flashback. So everything that's happened with Jack in terms of like Davy Jones, that all stays the same, but it's all told through flashback. So when then Jack can show up and he can have this dramatic entrance, because I think that works well. And so, yeah, so they finally get off the island. I wanted to shorten that a little bit. As cool as that was, all those action sequences, I actually think like it's fun, but it's too long. Everything that happens on the island with the cannibals. So I actually shortened that. So Jack, they never wanted him to be his god or anything or Jack to be their god. It was just, they were just going to eat them all. And so they escape, and Jack says, okay, we're back on the Pearl, and we need to go visit someone before we can figure out what we're doing. Because every time he holds the compass, it just spins in circles. And so he's trying to get the compass to work, and he can't seem to. So he's like, you know what? Before I can figure out where we need to go visit someone. So he goes to Tia Dama. That's the voodoo lady, if you want to get weird about it. And she explains that the compass isn't broken; it shows us what we want. And Jack's like, well, that's preposterous. Like every time I hold it, like it just spins in circles. So like, what is it that I want? Or sometimes it doesn't spin in circles. Sometimes it like points in a direction, but then other times it just spins in circles. And Tia Dama says, it points us in the direction of the thing you want most, but it doesn't tell you what you want most. You have to figure that out for yourself.
Oh, yeah, I like that.
And so at the same time, she sees William, and she's like, oh, you have a touch of destiny about you. And she says, and Will's like, what's your name? And he's like, oh, William Turner. And she goes, William Turner, like your father, Bootstrap, right? And he goes, yeah, my father died being a pirate. And she goes, no, your father's not dead. He was taken. And he's like, what? My father's alive? He's like, yeah, your father's on the Dutchman. And Jack's like, oh. So Jack's like listening in. Your father is still alive. So then Jack says, okay, tell you what. I know you want my compass so that you can get yourself and Elizabeth free. I will give you the compass. In exchange, you use it to find the thing you want most. Right? Your father. Right? So Jack says, fine. And he said, Will basically says, why would you trade me this? And he says, well, I want to get to the Dutchman anyway. Like, I need to get to the Flying Dutchman so I can figure out where this key is. And, with the compass, if you hold the compass, you can find your father because you want him most. And so, he gives Will the compass. In exchange, he says, I'll give you the compass if you find the key for me, because I know the Dutchman's got it somewhere. So Will does that. He opens it up. But for Will, the compass sometimes seems to be pointing in two different directions. So it's not spinning the way it was for Jack, but it seems to be pointing in two different directions. So this gets a little weird for them because they can't always seem to find out where they're going. But eventually, they make it to the Dutchman. They make it to where the Flying Dutchman is, and just before Will is about to leave on the boat, Jack stops him and says, "I want the compass back. In exchange, I'll tell you how to free your father." And Will has the compass in his hand. And there's a moment where he's like, well, if I just take the compass and run, I can save Elizabeth. But I also made a promise to Jack that I would help him find this key. And so in this moment, he's like, do I take the key, or take the compass and save Elizabeth, or do I save my father? And he hands the compass back to Jack. And Jack says, okay, the key that I'm searching for opens a chest that holds Davy Jones' heart. If you have the heart, you can control the man, and if that would mean you could basically set your father free. And then he pushes Will's boat away from towards the Dutchman, away from the Pearl. So the whole Dutchman introduction can play out the same way, with the Dutchman being like, "Do you fear death?" The way that he does Bill Nye is amazing and super, locutionary. He's just great. Yeah. Meanwhile, we split back to Elizabeth. Elizabeth meets up with Jack in Tortuga. So that whole thing can play out the same way. Jack is trying to basically find enough souls to pay his debt, like in the original. They have a conversation about doing the right thing. Elizabeth basically is like, you can't trade all these people for souls. You've got to do the right thing. And Jack is like, no. He's like, this is what's going to happen. I'm going to get all these souls, and then I'm going to trade them once I find the Dutchman. And she's like, well, how are you going to find the Dutchman? And Jack basically, he goes, look, you want the compass so you can get free. I'll just give you the compass, and in exchange, you use the compass to help me track down Will, who is the thing you want most, and he's on the Dutchman, which coincidentally I need to go find. So Elizabeth agrees. She takes the compass now, holds it open, and for her, the compass points exactly straight. It doesn't waver at all. And so they use that to find the Dutchman because yeah, sorry, let me just find my spot. So they make it to the island because they know that that's where Will has been. Like, he basically escapes, but like, yeah, the whole thing that happens in the movie where they make their way. Basically, the Dutchman is on their way to the island because Will had stolen the key from Davy Jones, and now Davy Jones was like, I need to go check on the chest. But Davy Jones didn't know that Will was stowing away on the boat after he escaped. And so he's making his way to the island. Jack knew they were going to make their way to the island, so he used Elizabeth to find out where the island was. So now they know where the island is. Davy Jones is trying to dig up the treasure, but he can't go on land, so he has his people doing it. They start to dig it up. Finally, James Norrington is also involved again. The fight ensues between James Norrington, Jack, and Will, the same way that happened in the original movie when they dig up the chest. And we can have the whole water wheel thing because I thought that was super cool. Then we also have the Dutchman crews show up, but this time we have two comedic fight scenes happening at the same time. So we have Will, James Norrington, and Jack Sparrow all fighting on the wheel. And at the same time, we have Elizabeth and then the two comedic pirates. I wanted to do more with their fight scene because I thought the idea of having a fight scene between a whole crew and three people who only have two swords could be really comedic. Like, you could have you could have some great actions, like shots, but while they're like passing swords to each other and like ducking and weaving, like I thought, like, how cool would it be to have two fight scenes where we're like interested in what's going on between like who's betraying who, Will, Jack, and James Norrington, and the two comedic pirates, the guy with the skullet and the guy missing the eye, and Elizabeth, who are all after the chest for their own reasons. Like, so all six of them are after their chest for their own reasons, and they're all having like a fight with each other, but also against each other. Like, I just thought that would be really, really interesting. Anyway, you could do some really cool stuff with that if you were a choreographer and whatnot. So that can all play out the same way. So James sees, like, Jack opens the chest, sees the heart, hides it in his jar of dirt. Norrington sees the dirt, takes the chest, and leaves the jar of dirt. So then they fight the Kraken. That whole thing, same thing still happens. And Jack basically is like, well, the ship is going down, and he's like, I'm sorry. He like, as he's leaving, as he gets off the Pearl, he's like, sorry. And he's like rubbing the boat, and he's like, sorry, old girl. And he like gets onto the longboat and starts rowing away. And as he's rowing away, he can see the whole battle happening, and he's looking at his boat, and he opens his compass and looks at the compass and looks back at the boat. And he closes the compass and starts rowing back. He makes it. He then finally, like, in one moment, he can save Elizabeth, and Elizabeth is like, "You did the right thing, Jack. Instead of saving your own butt, you came back and you're gonna try and save us, and that makes you a good man." And Jack basically goes like, "What? No, what are you talking about?" I realized that the thing that I wanted most was the pearl, the black pearl, and the reason the compass was going haywire is because whenever I was on the pearl, I already had the thing that I wanted most, because the pearl to Jack represents freedom. Right? What a ship is freedom. That's from the first movie. Yeah. So what the reason Jack couldn't figure out what he wanted is because what he really wanted is just to sail for free, and that's what the pearl represented to him. And so whenever he was on the boat, the compass wouldn't give him a heading because he already had the thing he wanted. And whenever he was on land, it would point. Yeah. So yeah, he basically was just like, the ship is freedom, and that's the thing that I always wanted. So the reason the compass wouldn't work for me is because when I was on land, it would point. it would point directly, and then as soon as we got onto the boat, it would stop pointing directly. And so the thing that he saw when he was on the longboat, it was pointing right back towards the pearl, and then he realized, oh, it's the pearl that I want. And so what he says, look, if I'm Captain Jack Sparrow, then the captain goes down with the ship. Everybody else get off, and I'll make sure that we're safe. And because this is, like, how can I live without the thing that I love most? I won't have a reason. So I'll go down with the ship. I'll fight the Kraken off. And he passes the jar to Elizabeth, and he says, give this to Will. He'll know what to do with it. And she's like, what do I want with a jar of dirt? He's like, give it to Will. He also passes the compass to her. Give these to Will. He'll know what to do with them. So they all escape. Jack takes on the Kraken, and he dies the same way, or is taken the same way, with the Kraken going down, because I thought that was really cool. So while they're on the boat, Gibbs is like, where's Jack? And he says he left behind, or he fell behind. That's a reference to the first movie as well, when they say if you get left behind, then if you fall behind, you get left behind. So Jack fell behind. So they all escape, and then they're on the longboat, and Elizabeth hands the jar of dirt and the compass to Will, and she says, what are these for? And Will says, Jack knew that these would help me get my father back. So Norrington, this is then a new scene, Norrington gives the how do I want to do this? I have to decide how I want to do this. Yeah, we'll do it this way. So they're still in the boat, and Will basically explains, he's like, with the compass, I can find the thing that I want most, my father, and with the heart, I can control Davy Jones. And he opens the jar of dirt, and there's no heart in there. It's just dirt. And then it cuts to James Norrington pulls the heart out of his pocket and gives it to Cutler Beckett. And so he's basically been full pardoned. So the pirates are now all back at Tiadama's place in the swamps. And he says, all the pirates are mourning Jack's death, and he did the right thing, and he was a good man. And Tiadama asks, what are they going to do next? And Elizabeth says, she's like, I'm sorry that this all happened, but we can finally get married. Like, Will and I can get married. And Will says, yeah, but he seems kind of like less interested. He's like, yeah, for sure. But first I'm going to save my father. And he opens the compass, and it points away from Elizabeth.
Oh.
And basically the reason for that is because I want to set up the next movie, where the more Will tries to save his father, the further away he gets from Elizabeth.
Oh, right. Interesting.
So, like, the only thing Elizabeth wants as a character is to, like, be with Will. And so her whole motivation is always, I want to be with Will, I want to make this work, I'm willing to make this work. But the more Will, spends time with his father on the Dutchman. I didn't really go into detail about that because that's already in the movie we got. Like, mine is heavily rooted in the movie we already got. I only went over details that are different. Mm-hmm. Also, Barbossa can come back, and that whole thing at the end, that would be great. But I really wanted to end with Will opening the compass and it pointing. Mm-hmm. He's like, with the compass, I'm going to get the thing that I want most. And basically, at the beginning of the movie, the compass kept pointing in two directions. One was Elizabeth, and the other one was his father. And the more William tries to get his father back, the more he loses Elizabeth. But we don't explicitly say that. We just
right.
So, but I really like the idea of him opening. When Elizabeth holds the compass, it never wavers. It's always what she wants most in the world is William. But when William holds the compass, he's torn at the beginning, but by the end of this movie, he's like, the thing I want most is to get my father back, and not Elizabeth.
Yeah.
That sets up a dichotomy. So, I know. I would be really excited to just write a pitch based off of that and be like, what Will do? The more he looks for his father, the more he's going to lose Elizabeth. That's what I'm trying to set up.
Yeah. I like the way you use the compass, specifically the moment where Jack's sailing away and then it points back to the pearl, and he's like, I always had what I wanted. I wasn't looking for anything else. Yeah. I already had it. I like that. I thought that was a really cool idea.
I think the compass in general is a really cool idea from the original movie, but I think it's sorely underutilized.
I think so too. I think so too. Yeah.
And it's also like it's a bit soft in terms of how it works.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
Which is why I don't even think it's in my.
Yeah.
I don't even think I mentioned it. Yeah, I just sort of did away with it completely.
Yeah. And I think the thing that I like as a thing of value, like even Cutler Beckett being like, "Oh, I want the heart." I don't even think that Cutler Beckett as a villain really needs the Flying Dutchman.
No, exactly.
Right? I think the East India Trading Company doesn't really care about the Dutchman. For me, Cutler Beckett wants the compass. And I purposely left that vague because I'd be like, "Oh, what would Cutler Beckett want the compass for?
Right.
What does Cutler Beckett want most?" And I saved that, so I was like, "Oh, in the next movie, the third movie, whatever
That's
I'm pitching, it's like, what does Cutler Beckett want most?" Because now he has the heart. James Norrington gave him the heart. Now he still wants the compass. It's like, I think the compass is by far the most important thing. This movie is about like what you want and knowing what you want. And so we see like what Will is divided between what he wants. Elizabeth knows what she wants, and she's the only character who really does. She doesn't waver. And I think in the original movie, she does waver. I actually think all the characters waver, and I think it actually makes for better conflict if William wavers and she doesn't.
It's an interesting idea. Yeah.
And obviously we see Jack. Jack doesn't actually waver. He just doesn't know how the compass works. And then when he figures it out, he's like, "Oh, I already had the thing that I wanted." I also tried to focus more on like there's now a conflict between Will and Elizabeth. It's just not spoken. Like William, like Elizabeth will basically follow William to the ends of the earth, but the more he follows his father, the less she's going to want to be with him, potentially. I don't know if that's the way that I'll do it, but yeah, I just think the compass is so cool, and I hate the fact that it's used so softly in both its use and its explanation. Like whenever the compass comes up, they'll be like, "Oh, it shows you what you want most," and it'll just be like pointing at rum for Jack, and I was like, "Oh, yeah, but I don't know. I feel like if it's a compass that shows you what you want most, it's going to show you the thing you want most."
Yeah,
you know
exactly.
I sort of stole it a little bit between like, it's basically the opposite of the Mirror of Erecid from Harry Potter.
Oh, right.
Like the way that I wanted it to work was like, if you had the mirror and you had the compass, it would be complete. With the mirror, it could show you what you want, and with the compass, it would point you to it. But if you only had one or the other, it wouldn't be complete. With the mirror, it would only show you what you want, and with the compass, it won't show you... the mirror would show you what you want, but not where it is, and the compass would show you where it is, but not what it was.
Right.
But because even if you don't know what you want, the compass will still point to it.
Yeah, exactly.
It'll point to the thing that you want most, more than anything in the world. So even if you're unsure, even if you're uncertain, it would still point to the thing you want most. So like as as your behavior changes or your ideals change, that thing you want most might change, like it does for Will. But because like before, William thought his father was dead, so he was never looking for it. But as soon as
that's interesting. Because you have three characters: one who has what he wanted, but he doesn't know it.
Yeah.
One who doesn't know what he wants, and that keeps changing, and one who knows what she wants and is able to. And so that's interesting how you have these three different characters whose relationship to the compass, by extension, the thing that they want, is different, and you have these different.
Yeah.
You have an opportunity for each of them to sort of parallel and contradict each other.
Yeah. And what I also really wanted to do is like show that Jack knows how the compass works so well when other people use it, that like he basically manipulates Will and Elizabeth into finding each other whenever it suits him.
Right.
Because he's basically like, I know exactly what Elizabeth wants. Like, I know what she wants. She wants Will.
Right.
And I need to find Will right now. You know what I mean? Or like I know Will wants to find his father, so if I give him the compass, but like, yeah, I also wanted there to be like, I didn't mention this because I was running on a little bit, but there was a moment that I wanted to have Elizabeth feel betrayed by Will, where like she had the compass, or when Will had the compass, and he was like, if I take the compass, I can save myself and Elizabeth by just giving it to Cutler Beckett. but she finds out that he gave Jack the compass back in order to find out how to save his father. And in that moment, that's the moment where like the compass becomes, or the compass for Will at that moment would have pointed towards his father instead of Elizabeth. Because he chose his father to save his father over save Elizabeth in that moment. And so she would have found out about it when they were like searching for the chest and like called him out, been like, you know, he could have been like, you know, Jack Sparrow tried to sell me to Davy Jones on the boat. She could have been like, yeah, but you had the compass. You had the compass and you chose the knowledge of how to save your father over saving me, even though I was already free. Like if we had the compass, we could trade for our lives. Now we're basically on the run.
Right.
And so
I had another idea to add to your pitch, to build the idea that this is something that Will wants, like to fill this gap in his life, this absent father figure. At the beginning, when they're doing planning for the wedding, have him trying to win the approval of his future father-in-law.
Yeah, and
not being able to do that.
Yeah, and finding that
there's
so
that later when that comes up. So like later when that comes up, we go, oh, this is what that tension is. This is him. He's been trying to fill this gap in his life, and now he can actually do that.
Yeah, and
that when that switch happens, it's believable.
We could also you could also set it up a bit more with like the winning his approval, because we know that Governor Weatherby doesn't like Will from the first movie, and he makes it fairly apparent in the second movie. And we also know that. Or what you could also do is like, I think it would be really, really neat to have a scene, because they don't really do this in the movie, where Will talks to his father about Elizabeth. Like everything. Yeah. I mean, like I don't want to say like Will's character revolves around Elizabeth, because it obviously doesn't. But like when you're getting married and you meet your father, you'd be like, you know, your father like looks at you and he's like, you know, you look well, Will. Like, what are you doing? And he's like, well, I'm getting married. You're like, oh, and I think it would be awesome if we had Bootstrap as a character actually be like he often like he is in the movie. He's pretty believable, but have him be like Will, you need to get off this boat. You need to forget about the Dutchman, and you need to go marry this girl. Right. And we could actually have Will be like, oh, you're getting married. Like, who is she? And he'd be like, and have Will like sort of smile like it's Elizabeth Swann. Like, this is who she is, and show how much he like loves her. But the more he goes after his father, the further away he gets from being with her. And we could, and I really like the idea of Bootstrap Bill being like, don't come for me. I chose servitude. You know, I'm on the Dutchman for 100 years. Go be with this woman. Go marry her. You clearly love her. I can see the way your eyes light up when you talk about her. She sounds wonderful. Don't worry about me. You don't. And he says this line in the movie. He says, you don't owe me anything, Will. I chose to be a pirate. And he's like, you know, I could say that I was, you know, doing the best thing that was for your mother and you when I left to go pirating, but that would be a lie. Like, I wanted it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I was just thinking that too. In the next movie, that becomes the revelation in the next movie for Will that really destroys him, where he's like, he realizes that his father actually left him.
Yeah. Like,
made a choice to, like, leave him and his mother.
Yeah. I don't know that I would go that far. I mean, it's definitely one option that I could do in the next movie. I don't know. There's a lot of options. I'm torn once again. What I'll probably do when we get there is I will probably reread this pitch, watch this episode, and then I'll probably watch the movie and then make it so that my pitch follows the movie and is an extension of this movie.
Right, yeah. I think you could. Yours followed it pretty closely, actually.
Because I didn't think there was actually anything wrong, except I thought the runtime was a little long and I thought some of the character arcs were poorly done. But this way, we set up conflict. Like, we're basically saying...
Yeah, exactly.
I also think this movie actually does set up the third movie fairly well, if you're paying attention.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's the thing. This movie kind of just exists to set up the third movie, which is why I think it suffers, because there are other great trilogies where the second movie to me is kind of the emotional apex.
Yeah.
Like Lord of the Rings, I think Two Towers is the best movie in that series
for many reasons.
That's the one. Also, I mean, my favorite scene, it gets me every time, is the scene where Sam gives his speech at the very end of the movie. Like, there's hope, and it's worth, because that's really thematically what's at the heart of, to me, what Tolkien was writing about with Lord of the Rings. It's about finding hope in this world that's basically crumbling. And then Star Wars, the original trilogy,
course.
I think Empire Strikes Back is the best, because that's the one where, well, it's also the one where they lose everything.
Yeah.
Where it's now the stakes have been elevated.
Yeah.
And the characters that we thought were invincible are now vulnerable.
Torn down, yeah. And Luke's lost a hand, and yeah.
Yeah.
But we also get like some revelations in that one too. Mm-hmm. Because Leia, we discover, is Luke's sibling. Like there's some twists in that as well.
We actually don't discover that in the second one.
No?
The big revelation is that Darth Vader is Luke's father. No, the thing is, there's reference.
But
to...
doesn't Leia at that point like actually like stop and go, we have to go back?
Yes, it doesn't explicitly reveal it.
Oh, okay. Because I was basically like, oh, she's force sensitive.
Because we know the rest of the movies, we know that that's what that's leading to.
Yeah.
But the movie does not actually explicitly give that away. It's referenced, and then Yoda says also earlier. He says, Obi-Wan says, "Oh, he was our last hope," and Yoda says, "No, there is another."
Yeah.
So those are the two moments that are
hinting.
They're foreshadowing that.
I think this movie does that as well, because other than the character arcs that are set up, we also see the crab hearts. Mm-hmm. Like we see Tia Dama has a crab heart that matches a music box that Davy Jones has. That also matches the symbol, like where the key fits into the chest, has that same crab heart symbol.
Oh, interesting.
And so, like, if you're paying attention, you can see things that are setting up for the third movie. The way that, like, Davy Jones fell in love with a woman who's the sea, who, if you're not paying attention, like, you figure out that it is Tia Dama. Like, I don't know. It's, I don't think it's done very well. I think, like, there's probably better ways you could have done it without giving up the ghost, but still having those references in it. But altogether, I would say that repitching this movie, actually just watching this movie in general, like full stop, watching this movie is fun.
I agree. I think it's a fun movie.
Yeah. Pitching this movie, I can see why it would be hard, because it was like, it's like, well, this movie's already worked fairly well. It's just like, there is something off about it. And it's like, what does the first movie have that this movie doesn't? Yeah,
exactly.
And it's hard to pinpoint, but I think when you say, I think we both sort of said it, but you said it the best when you said character arcs and having Jack as a more prominent character. Jack should be this conniving, not side character, but he can't be the driving force.
No, exactly. Or I feel like if he is going to be, he just needs to be, there needs to be a moment where he questions himself. And I think we both did that. Like, there's that moment where he realizes that he always had what he wanted.
Yeah.
And he goes back and he makes a choice.
Yeah.
Because I feel like that's to me, that's the biggest, that's probably one of the surest fixes of anything for me, is if a character
has
doesn't,
some kind of
by their own actions, has some a level of self-reflection, or by their actions actually affect something.
Yeah.
And that's usually also reflective of what their intentions are as individuals, what they actually want. Because if you look at any great show or movie, I'll just, like Game of Thrones, which has all these characters, but all of the characters, you can debate how great the last season was, but even the parts of it that are, that do work, there are, all the characters have something that they want.
Yeah.
They all, and you can tell, when a character's on screen, and when they're doing something, where that's coming from. Or if you don't, that their actions are rooted in something. If it hasn't been revealed to you yet, it will be revealed to you.
And that's why I think comedic characters work if they're not your main character.
Right.
Like, actually, this is interesting for Pirates of the Caribbean, because those two comedic characters we've been talking about, the guy with the skull and the guy who's missing an eye, they actually sort of have their own kind of overarching character thing, where they're talking about now that they don't have immortal souls, and they constantly bring up like biblical references.
That was interesting.
Which I think, like, you're just speaking of existentialism, which I think works really, really well, because like they use it as a comedic thing. So there is some like character development there, where they're like, what vexes the sea, the dichotomy of good and evil, and you're like, that's fun, because he's on this whole existential, biblical, theological trip. But there's clearly a story there to why he brings it up. And so there is an overarching story, but it's not the same as like a character development, the way that we both thought Jack needed. So I'm going to pick an example, and I'm not sure if you've seen this movie, but do you know Pitch Perfect?
The first one, yes.
Okay, so in the first Pitch Perfect, Fat Amy, played by Rebel Wilson, is hilarious. Like, absolutely so hilarious. In the second movie, they make her a main character, which means she has to have, like, an arc, a development, which is fine, but it makes her less funny.
Oh, interesting.
And I found that they actually had another character come in to sort of do the one-liners that I was like, I would have attributed to Fat Amy, because they wanted to give her a more starring role, which is fine. But I was like, oh, I'm disappointed because Fat Amy was hilarious because she wasn't required to have an arc.
Right.
Sometimes I feel like you can have funny writing, but if you're going to have a purely comedic character, then giving them an arc almost humanizes them.
Right.
Which is why, like, when you're like, oh, we don't want to give Jack a specific growth moment, then he becomes a bland character. He's still fun and funny, but he's a bland character to have as your main character. And that's why I think he fails as a main character as the series goes on. One thing I will say in my pitch is I wanted to have a scene where, like, and I said this, like, Elizabeth explicitly says, like, you came back, you did the right thing, so you're not trading the way earlier she says you're going to trade your life, or 100 souls, 99 souls, for your life, just for your life, like you're being selfish. And when he comes back onto the boat, she's like, I knew you would do the right thing. And I wanted him to be like, what are you talking about? Like, the thing that I wanted most was the pearl. It has nothing to do with doing the right thing. Because to me, that's what Jack is. Jack is still a pirate. He's still, like, you know, a bit of a coward at heart. He does things for piratey reasons. But at the end of the day, the thing he wanted most wasn't to do the right thing. It was the pearl.
Right.
The black pearl. And I also think what I tried to do is make sure that everyone had through lines from the first movie to the second movie.
Yeah, which is the right way to do it, I think.
And so that's why I tried to, like, call some things back, where it was like the way that they talk about Jack being left behind, the way that the thing that Jack wanted most, in my opinion, in the first movie, just by watching the first movie, is the pearl. He does everything in his power to get the pearl back from Barbossa. And so I thought, to me, like, would Jack just, like, leave his boat? Like, and at one point in time, he says, it's just a boat. Like, we'll leave it. It's just a boat. And I was like, the pearl? Really? Like, you made a deal with Davy Jones to raise it from the depths for 13 years. That's explicitly said in the movie. You spent, I don't know, 11 of those years trying to get it back from Barbossa after it was cursed. You know what I mean? You got all the Aztec gold back, deposited it on the Isla de Muerta, and then and now you're just going to be like, oh, it's just a boat.
Yeah. Exactly.
And for me, it was like the boat represents freedom. The boat represents what Jack wants the most. It's not really even just about the boat. It's what it represents to Jack.
Exactly. Well, I think you hit it on the head with that. Because I think that's him.
At the end of the first movie, he says, I don't think it's at the end. He says, you know what? He says, a mast, a sails, a wheel, you know, a deck. Those are things that a ship has. But what a ship is freedom.
Right. Oh, there you go.
Yeah, and that's from the first. I really wanted to make sure there was a through line. Like, yeah. Anyway,
it worked. It almost feels like that's what should. It feels that's what it should have been, because it's even better. It's better motivation for him to go back to the boat in the end. Anyway, it's more true to his character, and and it solves the problem of her having to, like, tie him up and handcuff him.
I realized what they were trying to do there is, like, make her into a pirate as well. But I actually don't think Elizabeth needs that. I think what makes it really interesting is that Will is becoming more piratey. Jack's already a pirate. And that Elizabeth is caught up on all this, but she's not a pirate. She's a good person fundamentally. I will also say that I didn't like that. I wanted to play with the scene where he, like, opens the compass and it, like, points back at the boat, but we don't see the compass. And I think the implication there is that he's going back for Elizabeth, because they have this sort of, like, weird sexual tension, which I think is weird and doesn't work. Okay, one of the jokes in the first movie is that Jack comes up to Elizabeth and basically says, I'm sorry, darling, it never would have worked out between us. And it's at the very end of the first movie. And it works because like she never had any interest in him.
Yeah, exactly.
And he's just playing to his ego. And I think it works, and it's hilarious, and it works so well. And then to sort of have this movie where it's like now they have this weird sexual tension. It's like, why? What for? How come? Don't. Mm-hmm. And so and so instead of him going back for Elizabeth, it's no, the thing he wants most isn't Elizabeth. It never would be Elizabeth. Jack isn't interested in women beyond sexual pleasure. Mm-hmm. The thing he wants most is the pearl.
Is freedom, yeah.
Freedom.
Is to be the captain of his own ship.
Yeah, he doesn't want to be a privateer. They say that explicitly in the beginning of this movie. Oh,
yeah,
it makes
exactly.
me angry when they ignore these kinds of character things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Any last minute things you want to add to
no
Dead Man's Chest?
No, that's it. I think I had fun talking about it.
I had fun watching it and talking about it.
I like watching it too. Yeah, I'd like to watch more movies like this where I'm not halfway through going, why? Why did we pick this?
Well, how many movies have we actually done that for?
There's surprisingly not very many.
We've been pretty good about it. The only movie that the two movies that I've really struggled with, and we said this before, are Tarzan and Transformers.
Yes.
Because even Waterworld, I actually thought was excellent. to pitch, not to watch.
Yeah, I had although I had fun watching it too.
Yeah. And then I thought, we did The Island last week, and that movie was crazy good. Or our pitch.
Well, yeah, exactly. I enjoyed the process. I think. I'm also more of I tend to lean more towards science fiction anyway.
Okay, yeah.
So I tend to like. I just like the questions that it asks. So I find that I'm more comfortable doing those.
Science fiction does tend to be on the smarter side, I will say.
Well, it's able to deal with more cerebral subject matter, I suppose.
Maybe because it's rooted in technology, like it often asks about our relationship, like just implicitly asks about the relationship between characters and technology, if it's hard sci-fi.
Yeah, exactly. And that's just something I find fascinating. So that's the kind of thing. And plus the other thing too, there are a lot more, in my opinion, bad sci-fi movies with really cool concepts that could have been better.
Yeah,
I just feel like they're because the thing is, having a cool idea for a movie is not enough. There's a real craft and art to developing a story.
For sure.
That's actually very different. And I think it happens a lot more with science fiction where people have really cool ideas, but in terms of taking it and turning it into something where there's actually a character arc and depth of character, that's hard to do in any genre, I think.
Yeah. And to be fair, when we do our pitches, like these are, I guess, extended elevator pitches. Like,
pretty much.
And we've talked about this before, where we say like, if we had an actual writing team, we would definitely want, diverse, in terms of background, race,
of course,
sexuality, because gender, because we're only writing from our perspectives, and we want those other perspectives. These are basically just like, if somebody was like, "Hey, we want you to come up with an idea. What can you do with this?"
Yeah, exactly. I approach it as this sort of like hypothetical, like, oh, here's the first draft. What would you do to
make it better?
Make a second draft.
Yeah. Great. Again, any last things you want to add to Dead Man's Chest?
No.
Well, then,
I think I've said everything.
Where can people find you?
Well, you can find me in Vancouver in my house.
Because nobody's leaving anywhere.
Indefinite future. But don't come find me because you'll be breaking the law. Yeah. Stay at home.
Yeah.
But get exercise.
Yeah, I do get exercise.
I'm on the internet. My Instagram, Twitter is Nate Draper. Letterboxd is Draper Nate.
Cool. You can find my band Robot Philosopher on YouTube, Spotify, and Facebook, wherever you get your great music. It's not out yet, and I keep talking about it, but I'll remind you that I do have another podcast on its way called Audio Mind, so keep your eyes open for that. And yeah, man, stay sane in that crazy world, and I hope this podcast maybe brings you a little bit of joy in your day.
Or at least enough of a distraction.
Yeah.
But joy would be nice. I'm not against giving people joy.
Joy would be nice. Yeah, peace out.
Yeah. See ya.